No, I think
All
we're
right,
good.
we're live. Time to
Brian,
go.
how are you?
Monday stand up. It's
Woohoo.
Monday. It's the week before Thanksgiving, so my thoughts are starting to drift a little bit. But today we're talking about ICBC's hack. After I mute this audio that's playing in the background. ICBC, did I get that right?
Yeah,
Industrial Commercial Bank of China.
Largest bank in the world.
Yeah, so they suffered a ransomware attack 5 days ago. I think it's been 5 days. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. My initial thoughts. Early in my career, I actually did a lot of consulting with banks, and I was always surprised. Well, I started off being very surprised. By the end of my time in that role, I was not surprised at all. But I was very surprised when I first started working in that capacity, because I would go into these banks and all of their tech would be 5 to 10 years old. Like, they didn't update stuff. I mean, this was in the early 2000s. I remember walking into a major national bank and they were using Windows 95 as their main client across their employees. Windows 95. This was in like 2003, 2004. And it wasn't just that one bank. Every bank that I went into, they were often 2, if not 3 operating systems behind whatever the standard was, running on the border of end of life of a lot of their software that was about to get support cut. So when I saw this, this article from this bank, it to me, it's not entirely surprising that they didn't patch stuff. We talked a little bit last week too about when I was at Washington Mutual, we had servers that were untouchable. It was, don't touch this machine. It's so old. Nobody knows how it works. It runs the ATM machines in the world, so we can't have it go down. But and we can't replace any of the hardware. We can't replace the software. Just let it go. And so it's not surprising. I'm actually surprised banks aren't targeted more. So what about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like it. All organizations have, we'll start calling them untouchables, right? Old equipment that probably should be in some untouchable VLAN. But I was a little bit surprised because apparently Industrial and Commercial Bank of China is the largest bank in the world. And I remember a couple of years ago reading an article that I believe Chase spent like $600 million, if not more, a year on cybersecurity, right? And so when you see something like this, at first you think, oh, well, it's probably because it was advanced persistent threat, or some attackers that are extremely well versed. But then you start reading the actual article, and you see that. Do you want to bring it up, Brian? Let's see. You start seeing that. Security researcher Kevin Beaumont posted on Mastodon that ICBC Financial Services had not patched its Citrix NetScaler gateway appliance against the critical Citrix Bleed vulnerability. And for our audience, if you don't know what Citrix is, essentially it's a remote desktop access tool, right? So especially in this remote first type of world, users will go to a Citrix portal, they log in with their credentials, and they get access to their, to the internal network or applications that are hosted on-prem. And so when I see something like this, I'm actually incredibly surprised. Because it's been a month since a little less than a month since Citrix announced this vulnerability. And I know small businesses who've patched their Citrix servers within days, right? And so, we talk about like patching systems. We mentioned it last week, but you might not be able to patch all your vulnerabilities internally, but the one thing you've got to do is patch internet-facing systems right away, right? So I think like where's the security team? Were they maybe not paying attention to the news? Were they, distracted by some other projects? But again, if it's internet-facing, needs to be patched, especially with a with a, if we look at the actual vulnerability itself, it was rated 9.4 out of 10, right? And so, CVE 2023-4966, a sensitive information disclosure vulnerability that allows an attacker to read large amounts of memory after the end of a buffer. Notably, and I'm reading this from a Rapid7 article, notably, that memory includes session tokens, which permit an attacker to impersonate an authenticated user. Again, this should have sent off alarm bells in the entire security team. So I guess to answer your question, Brian, I'm very surprised, hearing your story, because I would think banks have one of the biggest, if not biggest, security budgets out of all the organizations out there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's understand. I didn't work in security at the time.
Right.
I did. I came in as a consultant. I was typically implementing some software that would allow banks to broadcast their mortgage rate sheets out to all their mortgage brokers, and so I worked with the IT teams to implement this software. But I mean, cybersecurity was a lot different then too. In 2003, it was very different than it is today. So it to me, it is still surprising though, just because of the mindset that I saw in banks. I'm guessing that mindset hasn't really changed. They're not necessarily on top of their game. But the thing that I think about with this one is, you have to realize, if you don't already, cyber criminals are out there looking at these reports of vulnerabilities. And as soon as one comes out, there are groups out there that are racing against the clock to develop a way to exploit this vulnerability that just got mentioned yesterday. And so there's a theoretical clock that starts anytime a vulnerability is identified, where you've got bad actors that are trying to create an exploit. And if you're vulnerable to that vulnerability, it's just a matter of time before some type of ransomware or tool gets developed to exploit that vulnerability.
Yeah, especially again, if the if the front door is Citrix in this case, if there's a known issue, like, hey, I can bypass the front door and I no longer need a key, or I can steal a key, I mean, this should be your top priority. So we talk about, understanding your priorities, focusing. If it's internet facing and it has access to sensitive company data, and or there's no type of segmentation, if a bad actor were to get through, your Citrix or your Horizon, or even, the kind of the top vulnerabilities out there, your Confluent servers, F5 big IPs, those kinds of systems, it's critical to patch those in a timely manner. And in my mind, if you're a big bank, you've got to patch this within 72 hours. You can't be waiting weeks or almost an entire month. The other thing is, have a backup plan. And again, in my mind, is making sure that if you are, attacked with ransomware, you have good immutable backups, but also that you have micro-segmentation in place, so that, again, the bad actors cannot spread laterally throughout your network.
Yeah, at least the bank did have some good backup systems, according to all the news articles I read on this. At least they were able to continue their critical operations using manual USB sticks. So I'm just thinking, you've got hundreds or thousands of employees constantly running around all day with these USB sticks. Okay, put it in, plug this into your computer. Okay, let's do some work. Okay, let me run back to mine. They're just,
and you're hoping that the computers themselves aren't infected, right? Because there's a risk there. If you're running around with USB keys, because that's the story when you're doing like phishing or social engineering simulations. Oftentimes, what's the first thing you do? You take a whole bunch of USB keys and you throw them around the corporate office to see who's going to plug it in, right? So I don't know. I think it's kind of risky. I'm surprised they didn't do what MGM did and just go back to paper and pen, pencil and paper, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. They could have been spreading vulnerabilities with their USB sticks.
Yeah. So what's our focus action, to kind of wrap up the stand-up?
It's really about identifying, identifying where you can stay on top of this knowledge. And so there's a couple of recommended alerts to sign up for in the description. One of them is, I lost my list. You're going to have to call them
Yeah,
out.
no, I'll call them out. So the first one is CISA, and again, it's a U.S. government agency. So maybe that's why the Chinese bank was not following U.S. alerts, right? But CISA stands for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and they send out very valuable vulnerability disclosures or vulnerability alerts multiple times per week. And the reason it's important is because, again, you might have 100,000 vulnerabilities on your network, but the ones you might need to patch right away are the high severity ones, or the ones or the systems that are internet facing and or have access to critical data. And the second one, and again, Brian mentioned we'll have those links in the description, but the second one is SANS. And SANS is a institute that trains professionals in cybersecurity matters. I would say they are one of the top cybersecurity training organizations in the world. They also have a News Bites link that, they've talked about the Citrix vulnerability in the past. So take a look at those two at a very minimum, and make sure you sign up for those alerts.
Yeah, I would add to that a couple other places you can look individually. One, understand your environment and the companies that you're working with, and the software that you own and the hardware that you own. Those companies are going to put out their own alerts. So every company does it a little bit different. For some, it might be Twitter or X. It might be TikTok nowadays. There's a lot of different ways that companies are disseminating information, their website, email, whatever. So be sure that for your critical systems, you understand how do those companies broadcast or make aware of vulnerabilities that they discover as they discover them. In addition to that, just generally, I would say there are alert services like we just talked about that exist on any platform. Whatever your preferred social media platform is, find the person that's talking about security alerts and subscribe to them, follow them. We're here on YouTube. We don't cover every platform, but know that there are people out there on every platform. You just have to look for them if you don't already follow them.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, Brian. Well, great stand up, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Sounds good. Take care.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.